Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters and respected scholars. Alhamdulillah for this gathering here today, for us to recite the Holy Quran and listen to it and benefit from it. So inshallah, I know you've been listening to a lot of recitations so far, so I don't want to take too much of the time. I know we're very close to iftar. A lot of brothers are hungry, so I don't know how many of our audience is going to listen to me, inshallah. But hopefully we have enough that is paying attention. One of the aspects of the Holy Quran that I'm sure all of us have discussed and listened to a lot, but we might not understand the true impact of it, is the example of the miracle of the Quran. When we ask the scholars of Islam, what is the greatest miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, across his 124,000 prophets that he's brought down, that he has sent to us, what's the greatest miracle of one of these prophets? Out of all of them, what's the greatest miracle? The answer is, who can tell me? The Quran. The Quran is the greatest miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if we see every other miracle that's come down, every other miracle that has happened, do we have the remnants of those miracles today? Do we see it today? We might not see it. Or we might see some aspect of it, but we don't see it completely. Which miracle do we have which is right in front of us today? The Quran. So this aspect of the Quran is something that is considered a miracle. And inshallah, I'm going to discuss today within the few minutes I have about how we can understand the level of the miracle of the Quran. The first verses that I began and I started and I recited tonight was from Surah Hud. And Surah Hud, we see that a recitation here. The Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or do they say he has fabricated this Quran, that he's lied about this Quran? Say, O Prophet, قُلْ, produce 10 fabricated surahs like this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Ya Rasulullah, challenge them, tell them, okay, let's say this is fabricated. Let's take your side, this Quran is fabricated. Now bring me 10 fabricated surahs like it. If you can do just that, then we can accept that this is a fabricated book. What do we see? That in response to this, the Arabs are not completely silent. That they try to bring verses. Some of them even bring photocopies of the Quran. Al-fil ma-al-fil, wa ma-adraka ma-al-fil. Yeah, this Ahsan, Salawat al-Sayyid. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The elephant. What is the elephant? Do you know what is the elephant? Habibi, you're just copying the Quran. This is not a different version. So this is the completely exact style of the Quran that they brought. But we can see here that there's nothing like the Quran. And here's what's more amazing about it. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the miracle down to the people, how does He bring it? He brings it based on the conditions of its time. So during the times of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, we see that the people at that time bowed down to magicians. The magicians were seen as the leaders. They were seen as Fir'aun would have magicians on his side to show that these are the people that I have. These are the powers that I have. Okay, so what happens? We see Hazrat Musa, he puts down his staff and it turns into a snake. In this way, it eats all of the other snakes, and it shows that the other magicians have no power in comparison to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through this, we see that Allah's power is over the power of that time. Now let's take this example over to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see that during that time, who are the most powerful? Who are the people that everyone is crowded around? The sha'ir, the poets, the lecturers. So those people who would spin their words around, they would be very poetic in the way that they spoke, in a way that they would attract audiences. Audiences would come over to them and they would listen to them. It's during that time when we see that these poets, these people who are so eloquent from the Arabs, the greatest power during that time is responded to in what way? With the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He brings that Quran, then He says, O poets, you people who have such power, who have such beautiful recitations, now bring something like this, and then we can consider it fabricated. We see in that way, after He asked the Holy Prophet, then when the people are asked, they're completely unable to respond to that answer. And then we see, okay, so what if it's just one person? Okay, so one person cannot make that claim. What if we get them all together and we get them together to make one together with the group? Then we see another surah of the Quran, another ayah comes in. قُلْ قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا تأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. صلوات.
اللهم صل على
Say, should all the humans, every human, and all of the jinn, they come together and they make something like the Quran, they bring a light to the Quran, they will not bring its light, even if they assisted everyone. So if the billions of people came together just to create something like the Quran, Allah challenges them. He says, all of you get together, the ins and the jinn. If you can come together and you make something just like the Quran, then we can consider that this is not Allah's word. But we see that in that time, even though there are so many people who are trying to respond to the Quran, they're not able to in any manner. And I bring you a story here. There's a story of one of the most famous poets at that time. There's a man by the name of Mughira ibn Shu'bah. And this is a man during that time who was very famous for his, Walid ibn Mughira. Walid ibn Mughira. My mistake. Walid ibn Mughira is one of the people of the Quraysh. And he's one of the people of those tribes, and he's very famous to be known as one of the poets. He comes and he listens to the Holy Prophet. When he listens to the Holy Prophet, Walid ibn Mughira, he hears about how beautiful it is. And he says, this is a higher form than the one that I heard. Then the people, when he brings this to the Quraysh, when he says, what I heard from the Holy Prophet was something that no man can create. Then the Quraysh said, then what should we do about this? We've called him a madman, but of course if someone was to hear this, we cannot consider that a voice of a madman, right? Someone who brings these beautiful verses. Can you say this person is insane? So that's the first thing they tried to say to respond to it. But they weren't able to. Then they tried to bring a second point. What was their second point? When they asked Walid ibn Mughira, he says, then surely this is a magician. He was playing tricks on us, on our ears, to make us think that we're not hearing things properly, that we think that it's beautiful when it's not. Subhanallah. That is the beauty that the Holy Quran brings, that when they're not able to challenge it, when they're not able to bring anything to compare to it, what do they come to? They used to call the Prophet a magician. He said that, don't listen to the Holy Prophet, because what? That Muhammad, salawat, is someone who is a magician. That if you listen to him and what he says, he's going to trick you with his deceptions. So this is what the Holy Prophet had to respond to. During Arabs at that time, these people, that they would not even listen to them. And if they saw something that was that level of the Quran, they would close their ears. This is a magician. Listen, don't pay attention to this man. So this is what the Holy Prophet had to respond to. And I'll bring out our discussion here to the 5 main points of the Quran. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go further in depth. But I'm going to very quickly list off for us to understand how much of a miracle the Quran is. On our first point of the fundamental miracle of the Quran is the balagha, the eloquence of the Quran. And this is, of course, what attracts us to it. There are so many different Arabs that are, of course, not Muslims. When they listen to the Quran, they know how beautiful it is. They don't deny it. And there's that beauty that attracts everyone. And once you listen to it and you see that the Quran and the eloquence and the level to it, that sweetness, it attracts people. So that's the first level, that eloquence of the Quran. On a second level, the expression of the highest content from every point of view. It lacks any kind of superstitions in it. These are very straightforward beliefs that it gives you, and there's no flaws in these beliefs. And on the third point, there are scientific miracles that exist in the Quran. Unfortunately, I can't go too into depth with it, but if we look, even though the Quran wasn't meant to be a book of science, the Quran was not meant to be a book to explain the nature that we have. But even in that instance, we see that there are times that the Quran discusses science. And of our fourth point, we see that the Quran foresees different future events. غُلَبَتَ الرُّومُ, the Romans have won, but after this they will take defeat. Well, during that time the Romans weren't defeated yet. But we see that still the Holy Quran, it predicts something which ends up happening. So this is another aspect of the miracle of the Holy Quran. And if we look into it deeper, inshallah, if we don't, of course, recite this Quran, but we actually read and we reflect on that Quran, we're able to learn more from it. And the Holy Quran, it says, don't carry this Quran, but actually pay attention to it. Just like those people from before you. It says the Israelites, the Jews, they took their book, their Tawrat, حُمِّلَ التَّوْرَاتِ كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ. It says that's the Jews had taken, like they were like a donkey. They would carry their books on their shoulders and they would carry it around, but they would not reflect on it. And that was the cause of why they had been led astray. So we want to make sure that we respond to that point. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't carry your book like it's something that is a baggage, but read it and reflect on it and ponder it. And I want to finish off our discussion here. In the past few nights, when I was at another center, I was that exists in the Nahj al-Balagha. And we discussed many different aspects of it. But inshallah, I wanted to just bring one aspect in Sermon 110 of Amir al-Mu'min, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He discusses the Holy Quran. Inshallah, we're going to look at it with your loudest of salawats. And we know that Imam Ali alayhi salam, it was the best student of the Quran, right? So let's see what he has to say about it. وَتَعْلَمُ الْقُرْآنَ فَإِنَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْحَدِيثِ. Learn the Quran, for it is the best of discourses. It's the fairest of discourses. وَتَفَقَّهُ فِيهِ فَإِنَّهُ رَبِيعُ الْقُلُوبِ. What does he say after that? He says, understand it thoroughly, for it is the blessing, it is the blossomings of the heart. Rabi', of course, is a spring. So it has to cause an awakening of your heart. So first recite it. Then what? Then ponder about it. Understand it. Tafaqahu. Really get into learning about what the Quran is, right? And then what does he say? وَاسْتَشْفُوا بِنُورِ. What does he say? He says, seek cure from its light. فَإِنَّهُ شِفَاءُ الصُّدُورِ. Because it is the cure for your hearts. وَأَحْسِنُوا تِلَاوَتَهُ فَإِنَّهُ فَعُلْ قَصَص. Recite it beautifully, for it is the most beautiful narration. Salawat. So inshallah, of course, alhamdulillah, we have this opportunity to recite it tonight. And let's continue reciting inshallah, and we're going to finish off with a dua. Ya Allah, we ask you to brighten our hearts with this Quran. Ya Allah, we ask you to beautify our akhlaq with this Quran. Ya Allah, we ask you to save us from the fire with this Quran. Ya Allah, we ask you to allow this Quran to be our close companion in this life, and a comforting friend in our graves, a light in our sirat, and an intercession at our resurrection, and our companion in Jannah. Wajjal Allahumma fi farij Mawlana sahib al-zaman.
Bismillahir Rahmanir